Even though it may sound like a daft statement at this point, following all of Dovetail's questionable or outright scummy antics, I still think Train Sim World has the potential to be absolutely outstanding, so long as we get a good variety of countries in the game. Currently, only 7 are represented, despite the game having world in its name. This video is about some of the more unique motive power that, in my opinion, deserves to at least be considered for a potential TSW DLC package, and shouldn't be shunted aside, as it were, in favour of the same old generic standard gauge passenger and freight operations we've seen a million times over. Hamburg to Lübeck is one of those especially boring routes, whose situation is not helped by the bland scenery, and I'm tired of seeing Dovetail always taking the lazy, or as they would probably prefer, the easy and convenient options when it comes to deciding what routes to make. For the sake of my sanity, and so this video doesn't end up being stupidly long, I'm only going to talk about 5 motive power types, even though there's an absolute shitload of locomotives and multiple units from all over the world that I'd like to see in TSW4. But the chances of us players ever getting anything good that finally breaks the overdone UK and Germany duo are borderline non-existent. Such is the nature of a game that's constantly let down by its own developers, who seem hell-bent on almost exclusively making British and German routes with barely any exceptions. I thought the USA was one of their core nations as well. See one of my recent videos for a discussion on that situation. The following candidates are listed in no particular order. Number 5, the original EMD F40PH. And yes, I know that we've already got 2 F40PH variants in the game, but they are modern-ish commuter variants, specifically the EMD F40PH-2 CAT on Caltrain and the MPI F40PH-3C on MBTA. I'm referring to the original Amtrak F40PH, and preferably in Phase 3 colours to boot, especially since we still haven't got anywhere near a decent amount of Amtrak rolling stock in TSW. Seeing as a Phase 3 F40 would be out of place on a modern day route like Boston Sprinter, she would have to be included with a new route, but I'm not sure which one would be suitable. Sound off in the comments on what route you'd like to see made for the original EMD F40PH, if, by some miracle, DTG or a third-party developer actually made the damn thing. Number 4. The Comenge Electric Multiple Units from Melbourne, Australia. Although I was only in Melbourne for 6 days in October 2013, I've been a fan of the Comenge units ever since, and I still vaguely remember riding on these things up and down the Williamstown branch. These units were built by Commonwealth Engineering at their Dandenong workshops between 1981 and 1988, with at least 114 out of the 190 units built still running as of January 2024, including my favourite coach in the class, Motorcar 352M. For more information on the Comenge EMUs, and a suitable route for them, I recommend watching the video in which I discuss the Craigieburn line, one of many suburban routes in Melbourne, and Australia is a country that's long overdue for inclusion in TSW. Number 3. The Southern Pacific Railroad's AC-12 class, otherwise known as the Cab Forward. This was the first one that came to mind when I tried thinking of an American steam locomotive to mention in the video. And I reckon it would be cool to get this thing in TSW given her unconventional layout, not to mention the game's glaring lack of American steam locomotives. I mean, come on Dovetail, where the hell are they? Why have we still only got British steamers in the game? And it doesn't help that the only steamers we've got so far are all in the boring and overdone British Railways liveries. We want decent variety, goddammit! And now for a potted history on the AC-12 class. 20 of these beasts were built in 1943 and 1944, as the final steam locomotives ordered by the Southern Pacific. They were designed in such a bizarre way because they were intended to haul trains over Donner Pass, a difficult route with several long tunnels. And the idea behind making the locomotive all back to front was to reduce the risk of engine crews suffocating in the tunnels. Although, come to think of it, I wonder why the Southern Pacific didn't electrify their lines, unlike
the Milwaukee Road.
As for their wheel arrangement, the AC-12s are technically 4 882s, but they're really just 2 884s flipped around. One of the last runs of a cab forward took place on the 1st of December 1957, with AC-11 number 4274 doing the honours. As for the AC-12 variants, these had all been withdrawn by September 1958. Out of the 20 AC-12s that were built, number 4294 is the sole survivor, and she's now on static display at the California State Railroad Museum in Sacramento. On the subject of Southern Pacific steam locomotives, another one I wouldn't mind seeing in TSW is 4449, the only surviving example of the iconic GS4 class 484. Number 2. The Class 91 electric locomotive with Mark IV coaches and DVTs. For reference, DVT is short for driving van trailer. These beasts drew inspiration from the disastrous Advanced Passenger Train project, and were built for express passenger service. Initially entering service in 1989, the Class 91s went on to become staples of the East Coast mainline rail scene. These locomotives run in a push-pull configuration with the aforementioned DVTs, which are traditionally marshalled at the London end of the train, with 9 Mark IV coaches in between the Class 91 and a DVT. But withdrawals of these iconic locomotives began in 2019, with only 12 remaining in service as of January 2024. Their replacements are the controversial Class 800 and Class 801 units, part of the Hitachi IET family. Out of the 31 Class 91s that were built, one has been preserved so far at the time of uploading. That locomotive is 91131, and she's now an exhibit at the Museum of Scottish Railways in Bo'ness. Needless to say, the Class 91 and Mark IV coaches need to be made as an add-on for the severely underwhelming ECML Peterborough to Doncaster route. Only including the Class 801 was a very stupid idea, as it did nothing but make the route feel even more boring than it already was, and the in-game rail scene looks very unrealistic without the Class 91. Number 1. The FP/FT or Matangi class electric multiple units, because of course I had to bring up at least one New Zealand locomotive or unit. These units run nearly all Metlink suburban services out of Wellington, with the only exception being the diesel-hauled Masterton services. I dare say some people might think of bringing up the Capital Connection, but I do not consider this service to be part of the Wellington suburban network as it is not under the Metlink umbrella. The Matangi units were built by Hyundai Rotem of South Korea, with the first batch, comprising 48 units, entering service between 2010 and 2012, while the second batch, comprising 35 units, didn't join the flock until around 2016. The motor cars are classified as FP, while the trailer cars are classified as FT, and the interiors of each coach are distinctly different from the other. For one thing, FT coaches have bright green priority seating and spaces for bikes in a central low-floor section. These are little two-car units, or married pairs, to our American viewers, that can be coupled together to make consists as long as 8 coaches. I like these units because of their distinctive motor noise, comically out-of-place horns, smooth ride quality, and good colour choices for the interior. Here's an example of what a mātangi sounds like when she's pulling away from a station. To clarify things for anyone who doesn't know too much about Wellington's railways, they already had electric trains long before the mātangi arrived. These units replaced the much older DM/D or English Electric and EM/ET or Gans-Marvag classes, which first entered service in 1938 and in 1982 respectively. It is also worth mentioning that none of the original late 30s English Electric units still exist, as they were all scrapped in the 1980s. The units that survived as late as 2012 were all from additional batches built in the 1950s. Following their retirement and replacement by the mātangi units, 5 English Electric and 2 Gans-Marvag units have survived into preservation. As for a specific line in Wellington that I'd like to see in TSW, well, in an ideal world, I want to see the entire electrified suburban network in the game. But if Dovetail were to stick to their annoying habit of almost exclusively making linear routes, I would settle for them just making the 55.43 km long section of the North Island main trunk from Wellington to Waikanai. The latter has been the northern limit of electric services since 2011. This is my favourite part of the Wellington suburban network, and indeed one of my favourite parts of the New Zealand rail network as a whole, solely because of its incredibly varied scenery. After going past the massive freight yard in Thorndon, the line has 2 really long tunnels just outside Wellington, plus a good combination of urban and rural scenery, along with 5 more tunnels on the single-track section between Muri and Paikakariki, not to mention the other single-track section between Paraparaumu and Waikanai. It takes 1 hour to cover the full Wellington to Waikanai run with a mātangi EMU, and off-peak/weekend services typically run every 20 minutes, with express services added to the peak time schedule. So there you have it, 5 motive power types, or to be more specific, 3 locomotives and 2 multiple units, that I would like to see in Train Sim World. I'm not adding the 4 this time because, knowing what Dovetail are like, they're bound to release an unwanted 5th iteration at some point. Feel free to leave a comment below with your own motive power suggestions.